The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell on the small town of Millbrook like a punishment from the sky, turning the streets into rivers of brown water and making the old houses groan under the weight of the wet air. Everyone stayed inside. The shops closed early. The schools sent children home. Even the dogs hid under porches and whimpered at the sound of thunder. But not Ilara Voss. She stood at the edge of the forest, her boots deep in the mud, her dark hair stuck to her face, and her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. In her hand, she held a small device, no bigger than a matchbox. It was black, smooth, and warm to the touch. Every few seconds, a tiny blue light on its surface blinked once, then went dark again. She had found it 2 weeks ago, buried in her grandmother's garden. She had been digging up old rose bushes when her shovel hit something hard. But when she pulled it from the earth, she knew it was something else entirely. The object was too perfect, too smooth, too deliberately made to be anything natural. And when she held it in her palm for the first time, it hummed, and that tiny blue light came to life. Since that day, strange things have been happening in Millbrook. The radio stations played music that no one recognized, songs in languages that did not exist. The clocks in the church tower ran backward for exactly 7 minutes every night at midnight. Birds flew in perfect circles above the town square, hundreds of them, moving as one body, and then suddenly dropped to the ground, dead, only to get up again moments later and fly away as if nothing had happened. Ilara told no one about the device. She did not know why she kept it secret. It just felt like the right thing to do. Something inside her, a feeling she could not name, told her that this small object was meant for her and only her. She looked down at it now as the rain hammered her shoulders. The blue light blinked faster than usual. She had learned its patterns over the past 2 weeks. Slow blinking meant nothing was happening. Medium blinking meant something nearby was changing. Fast blinking meant something was coming. Something was coming. She turned her head and looked at the forest. The trees stood tall and dark, their branches heavy with water. The path that led into the woods was barely visible, swallowed by mud and fallen leaves. No one in Millbrook went into that forest anymore. Not since what happened to Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed was a hunter. He knew the forest better than anyone. He had walked its trails since he was a boy, and could name every tree, every stream, every hill. 6 months ago, he went into the forest on a Tuesday morning, and did not come back until Friday night. When he finally walked out of the trees, he was different. His eyes were empty. His skin was pale. He could not speak for a week. When he finally did speak, he said only one thing, over and over again. "It is waking up." No one understood what he meant. The doctors said he had been lost and dehydrated. His mind had played tricks on him, they said. But Ilara saw something in his eyes that the doctors did not. She saw fear. Not the ordinary kind of fear that comes from being lost in the woods. This was something deeper, something older, like the fear of a child who looks under the bed and actually finds something looking back. Thomas left Millbrook a month later. He packed a single bag, got into his truck, and drove away without saying goodbye to anyone. No one had heard from him since. Now Ilara stood at the edge of that same forest, and the device in her hand was telling her to go in. She did not hear words. The device did not speak. But the blue light pulled at her like a hand gently tugging her forward. She felt it in her chest, a warm pressure that said, "This way, come this way." She took a breath. The rain ran down her face and into her mouth. It tasted like metal. That was new. Rain did not usually taste like metal. She stepped forward. The first few meters were easy. The path was muddy but flat. The trees on either side leaned in like curious strangers watching her pass. She could still see the gray light of the open sky behind her. She could still turn back. But then the path turned, and the forest swallowed her whole. The light disappeared. The sound of the rain became muffled, as if someone had placed a thick blanket over the world. The air changed too. It was warmer here, and it smelled of something sweet, like honey mixed with smoke. The device blinked even faster. Alara walked for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes. The trees grew thicker. Their trunks were wide and covered in moss that glowed faintly green in the darkness. She had never seen moss glow before. She reached out and touched it. It was warm, like skin. She pulled her hand back quickly. The path ended at a clearing. It was a perfect circle, about 30 meters across, and the ground was covered not in mud or grass, but in stone. Flat gray stone, fitted together so tightly that not a single blade of grass grew between the pieces. The rain fell on the stone and disappeared instantly, as if the ground itself was drinking the water. In the center of the clearing stood a structure. It was not a building, not exactly. It was more like a door frame without a door, made of the same smooth black material as the device in her hand. It stood about 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide. There was nothing on the other side of it. If she walked around it, she would see the same clearing, the same trees, the same rain. It was just a frame, standing in the middle of nothing. But the device did not think it was nothing. The blue light was now steady. It did not blink at all. It just glowed, bright and constant, and the warmth in Alara's hand spread up her arm and into her whole body. She walked to the frame and stopped. Up close, she could see that its surface was not smooth after all. It was covered in tiny marks, thousands of them, carved so small that she had to lean in close to see them. They were not letters, they were not pictures, they were something else, something her mind tried to understand, but could not. She raised the device toward the frame. The glow from the blue light touched the dark surface, and the marks began to move. They shifted and rearranged themselves, crawling across the frame like ants on a sugar trail. The frame hummed, the same hum she had felt when she first held the device, but louder, deeper, strong enough to shake the rain out of the air around her. Then the space inside the frame changed. It was no longer empty. It was no longer a view of the trees behind it. Instead, it was dark. Pure, complete dark. Not shadow, not night, but the kind of dark that existed before anything existed. The kind of dark that was not the absence of light, but a thing in itself, heavy and alive and watching. Alara stared into the darkness, and she felt, with absolute certainty, that the darkness was staring back. A sound came from inside the frame. It was not a voice, not a word, but a vibration that she felt in her bones. It said nothing and everything at the same time. It was a greeting and a warning. It was a question and an answer. And then, from deep inside the darkness, something moved. The Last Signal, Part 2. Alara did not run. Every part of her body told her to turn around and never come back. Her legs shook. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. But she did not run. The device in her hand held her there, not with force, but with something like trust. It was as if the small black object was saying, "Stay, you need to see this." The movement inside the darkness grew closer. It was not a shape she could describe. It was more like a fold in the dark itself, a ripple, the way water moves when something swims just below the surface. It came toward the edge of the frame and stopped. Then a hand reached out. It was not a human hand. It had 5 fingers, yes, but they were too long, too thin, and the skin was the color of ash. The fingers moved slowly, carefully, as if testing the air on Alara's side of the frame. They touched the edge of the black door frame and held on. Alara stopped breathing. She could not think. She just watched as a second hand appeared, and then an arm, and then a shoulder, and then a face. The face was almost human. It had 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But the eyes were too large, and they had no color at all. They were silver, like mirrors, and when they looked at Alara, she saw herself reflected in them, small and scared and soaking wet. The creature stepped through the frame and stood in the clearing. It was tall, maybe 2 meters, and thin. It wore something that looked like cloth, but moved like smoke, gray, and shifting around its body. It stood very still and looked at Alara, the way a person might look at a painting in a museum, with interest, but also with distance, as if trying to understand what it was seeing. Alara found her voice. It came out small and broken, like a whisper through a crack in a wall. "What are you?" The creature tilted its head. Its silver eyes blinked once. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound. It was not a word. It was more like a note of music, a single tone that hung in the air between them. Alara felt the sound move through her, warm and strange, and suddenly she understood. Not the word, because there was no word. She understood the meaning behind it. It was a name. Its name. She could not say it with her mouth. It was not made for human speech. But in her mind, it sounded like the color of dawn. That moment when the sky is not dark and not light, but something in between. She decided to call it Dawn. It was the closest she could get. Dawn looked at the device in her hand. It reached out with one long finger and touched the surface. The blue light changed. It turned gold, and the warmth in Alara's hand became almost hot. The marks on the frame behind Dawn began to move again, faster this time, and the darkness inside the frame slowly faded until it looked like a window into another place. Alara saw a landscape through the frame. It was not Earth. The sky was purple, and there were 2 suns, one large and orange, the other small and white. The ground was covered in tall silver grass that moved in waves, even though there was no wind. In the distance, she could see structures, towers or buildings of some kind, made of the same black material as the frame and the device. They reached up into the purple sky like fingers. "Your home," Alara said. Dawn made another sound, and she understood again. Yes, home, but also not home anymore. Something had happened there, something bad. The silver grass was not just moving, it was dying. The towers in the distance were broken, cracked, leaning against each other like tired old men. One of the suns, the small white one, flickered like a candle in the wind. Alara felt sadness wash over her. It was not her own sadness. It came from Dawn, carried on that strange music between them. It was the sadness of someone who had lost everything and traveled a very long way to find help. "You need help," she said. Dawn looked at her with those mirror eyes, and she saw something new in her own reflection. She did not look scared anymore. She looked determined. Dawn reached out and took her hand. Its fingers were cool and dry, like holding a smooth stone from a riverbed. It turned toward the frame and looked back at Alara, and she understood the question without hearing it. "Will you come with me?" She thought about Millbrook. She thought about her grandmother's house, the one she had lived in since her parents died in the car accident 8 years ago. She thought about her grandmother, who was kind but distant, who loved Alara but never understood her. She thought about school, where she sat alone at lunch because she preferred books to conversation. She thought about her life, small and quiet and ordinary, and she thought about the device that had found her, or that she had found, and she wondered if there was really any difference. "Yes," she said. They stepped through the frame together. The first thing she felt was the air. It was thicker than the air on Earth, and it tasted sweet, like honey. The gravity was different too. She felt lighter, as if the ground was gently pushing her up instead of pulling her down. The silver grass beneath her feet was soft, softer than anything she had ever touched, and it made a quiet singing sound when she stepped on it. Dawn led her across the field toward the broken towers. As they walked, Ilara saw other creatures. They looked like Dawn, tall and thin, with silver eyes. But something was wrong with them. They moved slowly, as if they were tired beyond what sleep could fix. Some of them sat on the ground and stared at nothing. Others walked in circles, their mouths open, making sounds that were not music, but noise, broken and sad. "What happened to them?" Ilara asked. Dawn made a long, complicated sound. Ilara understood it in pieces. A sickness, not of the body, but of the mind. Something had reached into their world and touched their thoughts, twisted them, broken the music that connected them all. They were losing themselves, one by one, fading like songs that no one remembered. And the device? Ilara held up the small black object. "What is it?" Dawn touched it again. The gold light pulsed. Ilara understood. The device was a key. Not a key to a door, but a key to a frequency. A signal. Long ago, Dawn's people had sent out thousands of these devices across the universe, each one carrying a piece of their music. They sent them to planets where life existed, buried them in soil and stone, and waited. They waited for someone to find one, someone whose mind could hear the music, someone who could carry the signal back. Most of the devices were never found. Some were found but ignored. Some were found by minds that could not understand them. But Ilara had found one, and she had listened, and the music had found a home in her. "I am the signal," Ilara said quietly. Dawn made a sound that meant yes. They reached the base of the tallest tower. Up close, Ilara could see that it was not really broken. It was incomplete. There were gaps in its surface, places where pieces were missing. Like a puzzle with holes, Dawn placed its hand on the tower, and the surface glowed faintly where it touched. Then Dawn looked at Ilara and made one more sound. She understood. The tower was a transmitter. If it could be completed, it would send out a new signal, one strong enough to heal the broken minds of Dawn's people. But the tower needed something it did not have. It needed the frequency that only Ilara carried. The music that the device had planted in her mind was the missing piece. But giving it would not be simple. She would have to stand inside the tower and let it read her thoughts, her memories, her entire self. Every moment of her life, every feeling, every dream and fear would become part of the signal. She would be the signal. And once it was done, she might not be the same person she was before. Ilara looked at the sick creatures sitting in the silver grass. She looked at Dawn, who had crossed the darkness between worlds to find her. She looked at the flickering white sun that was slowly dying. She looked at the tower and said, "Show me where to stand." The Last Signal, Part 3. Dawn led Ilara to an opening at the base of the tower. It was not a door in the way she knew doors. It was more like a wound in the black surface, a place where the material had pulled apart to let someone through. The edges glowed faintly with the same gold light that now came from the device in her hand. Inside, the tower was hollow. Ilara looked up and saw the interior stretching high above her, hundreds of meters into the purple sky, visible through the gaps and cracks in the walls. The inside surface was covered in the same tiny marks she had seen on the frame in the forest, but here there were millions of them, and they all moved constantly, crawling and shifting in patterns that her eyes could follow, but her brain could not understand. In the center of the floor, there was a circle. It was about 2 meters wide, made of a material that was different from the rest of the tower. This material was white, and it glowed from within, softly, like light trapped under ice. The air above the circle shimmered the way air shimmers above hot ground on a summer day. "There," Ilara said. It was not a question. She knew. The device had been teaching her since the moment she picked it up, feeding her understanding, drop by drop, like water into a dry plant. Dawn stood beside her and made a sound. It was longer than the others, more complex, and Ilara had to close her eyes to catch all of it. It was a warning and an explanation at the same time. The tower would connect to her mind. It would read everything she was, everything she had been, everything she might become. It would take her memories, not steal them, but copy them, translate them into the music that Dawn's people used, the way humans used language. Her experiences, her emotions, her understanding of what it meant to be alive, these were the raw materials the tower needed. The sickness that had fallen on Dawn's people had broken their ability to feel. They could think, but could not feel. They could exist, but could not live. They needed someone who still knew how to feel, someone whose feelings were strong and deep and real. Ilara opened her eyes. "And what happens to me?" Dawn was silent for a moment. Then it made a sound that Ilara understood as honesty. The truth was that Dawn did not know. No one had ever done this before. The devices had been sent out with hope, not certainty. Ilara might feel nothing. She might feel everything at once. She might forget who she was. She might remember things she had never lived. The tower was old and broken, and there was no guarantee it would work perfectly. Ilara looked at the white circle on the floor. She thought about her life. She had always felt like something was missing, a piece of herself that she could never find. She was smart, but lonely. She was brave, but afraid. She loved the world but felt separate from it, as if she was watching life through a window, instead of living it. Maybe that was why the device had found her. Maybe the missing piece she had been searching for was not something she needed to find, but something she needed to give. She stepped onto the circle. The moment her feet touched the white surface, everything changed. The tower came alive. The marks on the walls stopped their random crawling and organized themselves into patterns that spiraled upward like a staircase made of light. The gaps in the walls sealed themselves, the black material growing like living tissue, closing the holes one by one. The air inside the tower became thick with sound. Not the broken noise of the sick creatures outside, but real music, deep and wide and beautiful, the kind of music that could fill a universe. Ilara felt the tower reach into her mind. It was gentle at first, like fingers running through water. She felt it touch her earliest memory, the feeling of her mother's arms around her when she was very small, the smell of soap and bread, the sound of a voice singing a song she could no longer remember. The tower took that memory and turned it into a note, a single perfect note that rang through the hollow space and bounced off the walls. Then it reached deeper. It found the day her parents died. She was 9 years old. She was at school when the principal came to her classroom and called her name. She walked to the office and saw her grandmother sitting in a plastic chair, her face white and wet. Her grandmother said words that Ilara heard but did not understand. And then the world broke, and everything she knew fell through the cracks. The tower took that memory too. It turned it into a sound that was sharp and dark, like glass breaking in slow motion. Ilara felt tears on her cheeks. She had locked that door inside herself and thrown away the key. But the tower had found the key, and the door was open now, and everything behind it came flooding out. She remembered the months after the accident, the silent house, her grandmother trying to cook the meals her mother used to make, and getting them wrong every time, the empty chair at the dinner table, the way the sunlight fell on her mother's reading glasses, still sitting on the bedside table where she had left them the last morning of her life. The tower took all of it, memory after memory, feeling after feeling. It reached into Ilara and drew out everything she had ever kept inside. The loneliness of eating lunch alone at school, the joy of finding a book that understood her, the fear of thunderstorms, the wonder of looking at stars, the anger she felt when people told her she was handling it so well, because she was not handling it at all. She was just good at pretending. It filled the tower from floor to sky. Each memory became a note, and each note became part of a song that was Alara's entire life, played in a language that was not made of words, but of feeling. It was the most beautiful and the most painful thing she had ever experienced. She was being taken apart and put back together at the same time. Understood completely for the first time in her life. Dawn stood outside the circle and watched. Its silver eyes reflected the light that poured from the walls, and for the first time, Alara saw an expression on its face. It was not quite a smile. It was something softer, something sadder. It was gratitude mixed with grief, the look of someone who was being saved and knew the cost. Through the gaps in the tower that had not yet sealed, Alara could see the creatures outside. They were changing. The ones who had been sitting in the grass lifted their heads. The ones who had been walking in circles stopped and stood still. Their silver eyes cleared, and their mouths began to make sounds again. Not noise, but music, joining the song that came from the tower, adding their voices to it, one by one. The sickness was lifting. Alara could feel it the way she could feel the sun on her face, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The broken connections between Dawn's people were mending. The silence that had swallowed their minds was filling with song again. But Alara was tired, so tired. The tower was taking from her faster than she could recover. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the white surface, her hands flat against the glowing floor. The device slipped from her fingers and rolled to the edge of the circle. The gold light flickered. Dawn made a sound of alarm and stepped forward, but it could not enter the circle. The energy around it pushed Dawn back like an invisible wall. Dawn pressed its hands against the barrier and made sounds that Alara understood as stop, enough, please. But Alara shook her head. She could see through the walls of the tower now. The creatures outside were singing together, their voices rising into the purple sky. Some of them were looking at each other, as if seeing for the first time in a long time. Two of them held hands. Another one knelt in the silver grass and touched the ground with wonder, as if remembering what it felt like to be alive. It was not enough. Not yet. The song was not complete. There were still minds that had not healed, still silences that had not been filled. If Alara stopped now, the sickness might return, and Dawn's people would fall back into the dark. She pressed her hands harder against the floor. She closed her eyes and reached into herself one more time, deeper than before, into a place she had never been. Past the memories, past the feelings, into the very center of who she was. There, in the deepest part of her mind, she found something she did not expect. She found a light. Not the blue light of the device, or the gold light of the tower. This was her own light. The light she had been carrying since the day she was born. The thing that made her herself and no one else. It was small but bright, and it burned with a heat that was not painful, but fierce, the way love is fierce, the way hope is fierce. She gave it to the tower. The music exploded. It burst from the tower like a wave, spreading across the silver fields, over the broken towers, under the purple sky, reaching every corner of the dying world. The small white sun stopped flickering and burned steady. The silver grass stood straight and sang. Every creature on the planet lifted its voice and joined the song. And Alara, at the center of it all, fell silent. The Last Signal, Part 4. When Alara opened her eyes, she did not know where she was. She did not know who she was. For a long, terrible moment, she was nothing. Not a person, not a mind, not even a feeling. She was an empty room with no doors and no windows, and the silence inside her was complete. Then slowly, like water seeping through cracks in stone, something returned, a color, blue, the blue of the device. It floated in the emptiness of her mind, like a small star in a dark sky. She reached for it, not with her hands, but with whatever was left of her. And when she touched it, a second thing returned. Warmth. The warmth of her mother's arms. After that, the memories came back one by one, like guests arriving at a party. Her name, her age, the smell of rain, the taste of her grandmother's soup, the sound of pages turning in a book. Each memory was fragile, like a soap bubble, and she handled them carefully, afraid they might pop and disappear forever. She was lying on the ground, not on the white circle anymore. Someone had moved her. The surface beneath her was soft, and when she turned her head, she saw the silver grass close to her face, each blade humming with a quiet, gentle song. Above her, the purple sky was brighter than before. Both suns burned steady and strong, the large orange one and the small white one, and there were no clouds. Dawn sat beside her. It looked different. The gray cloth that had wrapped its body was no longer shifting like smoke. It was still, calm, and it had changed color from gray to a soft blue, the same blue as the device. Dawn's silver eyes were fixed on Alara's face, and when Alara blinked, Dawn made a sound. It was a sound of relief, deep and shaking, like a breath held too long, finally let go. Her body was weak, and her arms trembled. Dawn reached out and helped her, its cool fingers supporting her back until she was upright. The world spun for a moment, then settled. She looked around. The field was full of creatures, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all standing in the silver grass, all looking at her. Their eyes were clear and bright. Their mouths moved with soft music, a song so gentle it was almost a whisper. They were alive again, truly alive, not just existing, but feeling, thinking, being. Alara felt something inside her chest that she could not name. It was bigger than happiness and deeper than pride. It was the feeling of having done something that mattered, something that could not be undone, something that changed the shape of the world. But there was also a hole. She could feel it, a place inside her that used to be full and was now empty. The light she had given to the tower, her own light, was gone. She reached for it the way she used to reach for her mother's hand in the dark, and found nothing. The center of herself was quiet and cold. Dawn noticed. It made a sound, and Alara understood. Dawn was sorry. Dawn had not known this would happen. The tower was supposed to copy her light, not take it. But the tower was old and broken, and it had taken more than it should have. The light that made Alara who she was had been poured into the signal, spread across the planet, and it could not be gathered back. Alara looked at her hands. They looked the same. Her fingers, her nails, the small scar on her left thumb, from the time she cut herself opening a can. She looked the same. She sounded the same. But she felt different. She felt like a house after a fire, still standing, but hollow. The walls intact, but the rooms empty. "Will it come back?" she asked. Dawn was quiet for a long time. Then it made a sound that meant maybe. The light was not destroyed. It was scattered. It lived now in every creature on this planet, a tiny piece of Alara in each of them. Over time, as she lived and felt and experienced new things, she might grow a new light. But it would not be the same light. It would be different, shaped by different moments, colored by different memories. Alara nodded. She did not cry. She was not sure she could cry right now. The place where tears came from felt dry and distant. Dawn stood and offered its hand. Alara took it and got to her feet. The silver grass sang louder when she stood, and the creatures in the field made sounds that she understood as welcome, and thank you, and we see you. It was like standing in the middle of 1,000 voices, all saying her name in a language made of music. Dawn led her through the field, toward the towers. They were different now. The cracks had sealed, and the black surfaces gleamed in the light of the two suns. Between the towers, she could see creatures moving with purpose, building, repairing, creating. Some of them shaped the black material with their hands, pulling it like clay, forming walls and bridges and pathways. Others worked with the silver grass, weaving it into structures that looked like nests or cocoons, large enough for several creatures to sleep inside. As they walked, Dawn explained. Its people had been sick for a long time. The sickness had a name, a sound that Alara understood as the quiet. It had come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time, a wave of silence that washed over their world and stole the music from their minds. Without the music, they could not think clearly. Without thinking, they could not feel. Without feeling, they could not connect to each other. And without connection, they began to fade. They had tried everything. Their technology, far beyond anything humans had ever created, could not fix what was broken. The quiet was not a disease that could be cured with medicine or machines. It was a disease of the spirit, and it needed a spiritual cure. That was why they had sent the devices out into the universe. They needed a mind that was different from theirs, a mind that carried music in a different form. Human emotions, raw and messy and overwhelming, were exactly what the tower needed to create a new signal. Alara listened to all of this and tried to feel something about it. She tried to feel proud or important or even curious. But the feelings came slowly and weakly, like radio signals from very far away. She could hear them, but she could not hold them. Dawn brought her to the tallest tower and led her inside. The interior was transformed. The white circle on the floor still glowed, but the walls were now covered in light instead of crawling marks. The light formed images, and Alara realized with a shock that the images were her memories. She saw herself as a child, riding on her father's shoulders. She saw herself reading under a tree in her grandmother's garden. She saw herself standing in the rain at the edge of the forest, holding the device. Her life was written on the walls of this tower. It was part of the building now, part of the signal, part of the cure. Everything she had ever felt was being broadcast across the planet, feeding the minds of Dawn's people, teaching them how to feel again. Dawn touched one of the images on the wall. It was the memory of Alara's mother singing to her at night. Dawn's hand passed through the light, and a sound filled the tower, soft and warm. It was not the original song. It was the feeling of the song, the safety and love and comfort of it, translated into the music of Dawn's world. A tear ran down Dawn's face. Alara stared. She had not seen Dawn cry before. She did not even know Dawn could cry. The tear was not clear like a human tear. It was silver, like Dawn's eyes, and it caught the light from the walls as it fell. Dawn made a sound. Alara understood it as a gift. Dawn reached into its own chest. Its hand passed through the cloth and into the skin, and when it drew its hand back, it held something. It was small, smaller than the device, and it glowed with a light that was not blue or gold, but silver. It was shaped like a drop of water, frozen in the moment, before it falls. Dawn held it out to Alara. She took it. The moment it touched her palm, she felt warmth rush into the cold, empty place at her center. It was not her old light. It was Dawn's light, a piece of it, freely given. It was different from what she had lost. Where her light had been fierce and burning, this light was cool and steady, like moonlight, like the glow of stars reflected on still water. "You did not have to do that," Alara whispered. She understood it as something close to, "Of course I did. You gave everything. This is the least I can give back." Elara closed her hand around the silver drop and pressed it to her chest. She felt it settle into the empty space inside her, not filling it completely, but giving it a floor to stand on, a foundation on which new things could grow. For the first time since she had woken up in the silver grass, she felt something clearly. It was not happiness or sadness or fear. It was connection, a thread between her and Dawn, thin but unbreakable, made of shared sacrifice and mutual understanding. She was not alone in this strange world. She had someone who understood what it cost to save a world, because they had both paid the price. Dawn looked toward the frame that still stood at the edge of the field, the doorway between worlds. Through it, Elara could see rain, Millbrook rain, earth rain, the gray sky and the dark trees and the mud. Dawn made a sound. It was a question. "Do you want to go home?" The Last Signal. Part 5. Elara stood between two worlds. Behind her, the silver grass sang under a purple sky with two steady suns. In front of her, through the dark frame, she could see the forest clearing in Millbrook, the rain still falling on the flat gray stones. Both places pulled at her, and for a long moment she could not move. She thought about home. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the yellow curtains that moved in the breeze from the open window, the old radio that played songs from 30 years ago. She thought about the way her grandmother left a glass of warm milk on her bedside table every night without being asked. She thought about the garden where she had found the device. The rose bushes her mother had planted years before she was born, the roots still alive under the soil even after the flowers were cut. She thought about the creatures who had their music back, who were building and creating and connecting again. She thought about the silver tear on Dawn's face, and the piece of light now resting in her chest. She thought about how this place needed her, and how, in a way she had never expected, she needed it too. "How long have I been gone?" she asked. Dawn made a sound. Elara understood. Time moved differently between the two worlds. On Dawn's planet, she had been here for almost a full day. On Earth, barely an hour had passed. The rain she had walked into was still the same rain. Her footprints in the mud were still fresh. That made the decision both easier and harder. If she went back now, no one would even know she had been gone. Her grandmother would still be sitting in her chair by the fire, reading her book, waiting for the rain to stop. The world would be exactly as she had left it. Nothing lost, nothing missed. But Elara was not the same person who had walked into that forest an hour ago. She had crossed into another universe, saved a dying world, given away her own light, and received a piece of someone else's. She had felt things she could not describe and seen things she could not explain. How could she go back to eating lunch alone at school? How could she sit in a quiet house and pretend that none of this had happened? She looked at Dawn. Dawn stood perfectly still, waiting. It did not push or pull. It did not beg her to stay or tell her to go. It simply waited, respecting her choice the way it had respected everything about her since the moment they met. "If I go back," she said, "can I return?" Dawn touched the frame. The marks on its surface shifted, and Elara understood the answer. The frame was connected to the device. As long as she carried the device, the door between worlds would remain. She could live in both places, walk between the rain and the silver grass, belong to two worlds instead of one. Elara picked up the device from where it had fallen, near the circle inside the tower. Dawn had brought it to her while she slept. The blue light was back, steady and warm. She held it in one hand and pressed the other hand to her chest, where Dawn's silver light rested like a second heartbeat. "I need to go back," she said. "My grandmother is there. She lost my mother, She cannot lose me too. Dawn nodded. It was a human gesture, one that Dawn must have learned from watching Alara. It looked strange on a face that was almost but not quite human. But it also looked right, like a bridge between two languages. Alara stepped toward the frame. The darkness inside it was gone now, replaced by a clear view of the forest clearing. She could smell the rain, wet earth and leaves, and the faint metal taste that had been there before. She could hear the water hitting the stone floor of the clearing. It sounded different now. It sounded like music. She stopped at the edge of the frame and turned back. The field behind her was full of life. Creatures moved through the silver grass, their voices rising and falling in song. The tower stood tall against the purple sky. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear a sound like laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from deep relief, from the joy of waking up after a long, dark sleep. "I will come back," she said. Dawn made a sound. It was the warmest sound she had heard from it, full of light and certainty. It meant, "I know." Alara stepped through the frame and into the rain. The cold hit her like a wall. After the warm, sweet air of Dawn's world, the rain of Millbrook felt like needles on her skin. She gasped, and her breath came out in a white cloud. The mud sucked at her boots. The gray sky pressed down on her like a lid on a jar. But she was smiling. She walked back through the forest. The glowing moss on the tree trunks had faded. The path was just a path again, muddy and ordinary. The sounds of the forest were normal sounds, rain and wind and the occasional crack of a branch. If she had not just lived through the most extraordinary experience of her life, she might have thought she had dreamed the whole thing. But the device was in her hand, real and warm and glowing blue. And the silver light in her chest was there, steady and cool, a constant reminder that some things were true, even when they seemed impossible. She reached the edge of the forest and looked out at Millbrook. The town was gray and quiet under the rain. Smoke rose from chimneys. A single car moved slowly down the main street, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Her grandmother's house sat at the end of a narrow lane, a small stone building with a red door, and a garden that was more mud than flowers at this time of year. The light in the kitchen window was on, warm and golden, and through the glass she could see her grandmother moving around, probably making tea. Alara opened the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around her like a blanket. Her grandmother turned from the stove and looked at her with the expression she always wore when Alara came in from the rain, a mix of worry and gentle frustration. "You are soaking wet," her grandmother said. "I told you not to go out in this weather." "I know," Alara said. "I am sorry." Her grandmother shook her head and handed her a towel. "Change your clothes. I am making soup." Alara took the towel and started toward her room. Then she stopped. She turned back and did something she had not done in a long time. She walked to her grandmother and hugged her. Not a quick, polite hug, but a real one, long and tight, the kind that says everything that words cannot. Her grandmother went stiff with surprise. Then slowly, her arms came up and wrapped around Alara, and she held her granddaughter the way she used to hold her daughter, with all the love and fear and hope that a person can carry without breaking. "What is this for?" her grandmother asked, her voice thick. "Nothing," Alara said. "Everything." They stood like that for a long time, in the warm kitchen, with the rain falling outside and the soup boiling on the stove. The device in Alara's pocket pulsed with blue light, and the silver warmth in her chest glowed brighter, and for the first time in years, the house did not feel empty. That night, Alara sat by her window and looked at the sky. The rain had finally stopped, and the clouds were breaking apart. revealing patches of black sky dotted with stars. She held the device in her hand and watched the blue light blink slowly. Somewhere, impossibly far away and impossibly close, a world of silver grass and purple sky was alive again because of her. Creatures she would never fully understand were singing songs made from her memories, her pain, her love, her life. She thought about Thomas Reed, the hunter who had gone into the forest and come back changed. He had seen the frame, she was sure of it now. He had seen the darkness inside it and had not been ready. He had run. She did not blame him. If she had found the frame without the device, without the connection, without the music, she might have run too. But she had the device, and she had dawn's light, and she had a door that she could walk through whenever she chose. She put the device on her bedside table, next to the lamp and the book she was reading. The blue light blinked in the darkness, steady and patient. She lay down and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would go to school. She would sit in her classes and eat her lunch and walk home through the streets of Millbrook. She would do all the ordinary things that ordinary people do. But she would carry inside her a secret that was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. A connection to another world. A piece of alien light in her chest. And the knowledge that she, Elara Voss, quiet girl from a small town, had saved an entire civilization with nothing but the music of being alive. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, and in her dreams, the silver grass sang.